in the Duma Council. Authorities arrest in Damascus countryside wanted armed men and confiscate weapons and ammunition. And a popular demonstration in the Turkish city of Antioch supports Syria and rejects any intervention in its affairs. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to this news bulletin live from our news center here in Damascus. President Bashar al-Assad has received head of the International Relations Committee in the Duma Council, Alexei Bushkanov. Mr. Bushkanov renewed his country's support for reforms in Syria. He underlined the importance of continuing work to find a political solution for the crisis based on dialogue among all concerned Syrian bodies and sides and away from foreign intervention. He also stressed that the security in Syria is a basic element for the security of the region. Mr. Bushkanov expressed his country's rejection of any kind of foreign intervention in Syria's internal affairs, pointing out that Russia's stance springs from its keenness on adhering to the principles of international law and the interests of the Syrians. He stressed that the United Nations Security Council should be neutral concerning the Syrian issue. President al-Assad expressed appreciation for the stance of the Russian people and leadership towards Syria and Russia's keenness on being continuously updated on what Syrian institutions and people are being targeted to by armed terrorist groups, which are financed and supported with weapons from foreign sides in an attempt to destabilize Syria and foil any effort for finding a solution, particularly following the reform steps that have been implemented. Russian Prime Minister Vladimir Putin asserted that Russia would consolidate its force of strategic deterrence because the current world developments include unpredictable dangers. In an article published in Russiskaya Gazeta, Mr. Putin said there were increasing local and regional wars and zones of instability, full of chaos. These include cases of dispute along the borders of Russia and its allies, in addition to violations of the basic rules of international law. He pointed out that this means that diplomatic methods would not be enough to deal with such cases or to solve such disputes. He went on to say that some states were trying, in these circumstances of economic shocks, to solve their problems at the expense of others through the force of pressure. Mr. Putin said that Russia would respond to the deployment of anti-missile American defense systems in Europe. He added that the response would be active and equal to the American steps in this field. He pointed out to the necessity of decisive measures to consolidate the Russian force of air and space defense in parallel with the policy of the US and NATO in the field of missile shields.
Article 55. The legislative authority in the state is the People's Assembly.
An armed terrorist gang today kidnapped First Lieutenant Hammam Turki Ramadan in the countryside of Deir ez-Zor while he was going to work in a civilian car. Forces of the border guards today clashed with an armed terrorist gang in the area of Athriya and Hama city. Lieutenant Colonel Yasser Khidr Abbas and Sergeant Hassan Kharfan Pasha were killed, while Corporal Abdul Hakim Hassan was wounded. Within its campaign to combat armed terrorist groups in East Ghouta area and Damascus countryside, especially in the areas of Saqba, Hamouriya, Arbin, Kafar Batna, Duma and Harasta, authorities arrested a group of wanted armed men and confiscated their automatic machine guns. Authorities also broke into a hideout of an armed terrorist group in East Ghouta and confiscated a large quantity of weapons and ammunition. Furthermore, a number of wanted men handed themselves in to the authorities.
Article 56. The People's Assembly term shall be for 4 calendar years from the date of its first meeting, and it may not be extended, except by a law in case of war.
In Antioch, a popular march was staged in support of Syria. The Turkish participants defied their government, which tried to stop this march. They expressed their rejection of any foreign intervention in Syria's affairs.
The demonstrators expressed support for Syria and President Bashar al-Assad. There were nearly 10,000 people representing various popular and democratic forces in Turkey. They denounced the policy of Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his collusion with the West against Syria. The demonstrators shouted slogans asserting their stand with the Syrian brothers against the savage attack targeting the region through the Syrian gates. The demonstrators expressed support for Syria and President Bashar al-Assad. There were nearly 10,000 people representing various popular and democratic forces in Turkey. They denounced the policy of Recep Tayyip Erdogan and his collusion with the West against Syria. The demonstrators shouted slogans asserting their stand with their Syrian brothers against the savage attack targeting this region through the Syrian gates. The demonstrators carried Syrian flags and pictures of President al-Assad. They condemned imperialist intervention in the whole region against Syria, the friendly neighboring countries. They called upon the Turkish government to desist from taking part in such plots. They denounced the policy of the US, Israel, and the ruling party in Turkey.
Syrian and Arab citizens organized a march in Rome to denounce the plots aiming to tear Syria apart in order to control the Middle East. Italian citizens took part in this march and asserted their stand by the Syrian people. Archbishop Hilarion Capucci of Jerusalem denounced suspicious interventions in Syria's internal affairs. He also condemned the sanctions, vicious diktats, and various types of pressure against Syria.
We condemn the acts of sabotage in Syria and reject any intervention in its internal affairs. We are witnessing the collusion of the interests of terrorist gangs and the US and Zionism. This collusion has become exposed.
The march was joined by members of the Italian organization of No to War. The demonstrators marched to the Saudi embassy and the UN office in Rome, carrying placards calling for lifting foreign hands off Syria and denouncing terrorism. The demonstrators called upon the Italian government to change its policy towards Syria and to replace it with a policy based on justice and a realization of the reality of events in Syria.
Article 1. The Syrian Arab Republic is a democratic state enjoying full sovereignty, and no part of its land should be wavered. The people in Syria are part of the Arab nation.